but think about the structure of what's happening, because that'll be your way into the conversation later on. So our seminar is called "If You Want to Get Ahead, Get a Theory," and we stole that title from somebody called Annette Karmeloff-Smith, and she was somebody that worked with Barbalin, Helder, and Piaget in Geneva. Eventually became a professor of education, of cognitive science in London, and wrote a paper with Barbalin in Helder, which was this one: "If you want to get a theory, get ahead." And actually the paper was about some observations that made of children, and the children were balancing blocks, and they were trying to make the blocks balance. And what they noticed is, and I believe this is quite a human trait, which is that first of all, oh, Mary's joining us, that's great.
Hi, Mary.
Let's just pause for a minute, because it'll be worth doing the reintroduction, won't it, if we've got somebody else joining us. Is Mary there?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, okay. We'd only just kicked off, Mary, so it's probably wise that we just go back a little bit, start again, and then we'll get into it. So yeah, Alex and I said that we'd be the first to have a go at this seminar. So any feedback from colleagues and friends and guests would be really welcome, because we're not sure we've got this right. So the title of this, our first seminar for Let's Think Forum, is called "If You Want to Get Ahead, Get a Theory." And we've stolen this title from Annette Karmeloff-Smith, who worked with Barbel in Helder and Piaget in Geneva, and eventually became a professor in London. And the title of the paper was a paper where they had done some observations of children who were balancing little beams of wood one on top of another. And as in typical kind of Piagetian style, some of the beams were a little bit difficult because they had weights in different places, and therefore they didn't behave in the way that the child might have expected. And although the paper, this is ostensibly in the context of that balancing bits of wood, what they noticed was a behavior which I think is quite common to people generally, which is that the children, first of all, acted. They tried to make it work. And then after a bit, they began to see that the making it work that they were trying didn't really work at all. And the observer could see them not only working on theories that were implicit in their actions, but working on a new theory. And the development of that theory meant that something happened to them, which is, instead of it looking at the goal of, I've got to make these balance, they began a different set of cognitive processes, which was looking at the means. How do we make these balance? And that shift from action to theory in action is, I think, quite a common kind of human trait. You might have a go at something, you're trying to make it work, you've got your goal in mind, but after a while, because it's not working, you start to look at the means, and the means require some sort of theory in the background. So it occurred to Alex and I that this actually might be something that's applicable, say, to teaching. So what if a teacher is beginning in their practice, they're attempting various actions, they have certain goals in mind. It might be anything from I'd want my class to be calm and a learning environment in which I think children are likely to be successful because of calmness. That's the goal that they're looking at. They might be looking at, I actually want the children to learn some content. But I think practitioners in particular, over time, begin to move away from those types of goals to other goals. They want their children to flourish. They want their children to learn more deeply. They want their children to think. They want children, and this is the way I term it, to develop. And to do that, we think a theory is necessary. That there are so many actions that you could take that actually those actions are, in a sense, random. But a theory unites those actions into something that might be profoundly more successful at helping children flourish. So the question is that we're putting to us in this seminar today, which is which theories might be applicable to the flourishing of children. When one, if you were to type into Google educational theory, you would see a cascade of different educational theories. And so here's the approach we're going to take. I've asked Alex if he could identify some possible candidates. And in the way that you might have in Strictly Come Dancing, we've already identified the celebrity candidates, and now we're going to eliminate them. So the first task I'm going to do is to seek Alex's view on these 9 potential candidates theories. And then I'm going to make him weed out some of them and give his reasons for that. And I'm going to interrogate him about them as to why he's getting rid of them. And, I said earlier, this is, if you're looking at the structure of the seminar, that's the way to get involved. At some point, you might wish to ask Alex the same questions that I'm asking as to why not that? I find it useful. Why is this being dismissed? Bearing in mind, he's got a pretty tough job, which is to bring it down to just 3 potential theoretical candidates. So Alex, I asked you if you could pick out some theories. Have you got some theories for us there?
Yeah, but I just want to remind you, you've missed out something. Is why on earth would we want a theory? Why would it be useful to teachers? And my first answer to that question is it often helps explain how things happen, because theories are good. That's one thing of giving an explanatory framework, and especially good theories that also can help us understand why things happen in a way that we might not want. There might be anomalous things happen. And anyone that's worked with kids knows that surprises always come around the corner. So theories are useful in mapping out what the possible avenues learning might take, and the anomalous areas and the hidden little valleys that the flow of learning might get into.
Yeah, you're right. I missed out that, but the powerful predictive nature of the theory as well is helpful to teachers, isn't it?
Yeah, predicting, if I do this with this class, and if I do that with this class, and I know something about them, the kind of boundary conditions, that I'll get a different result. And that idea of theories helping us be adaptive as teachers to the challenges, and also what might happen in the afternoon compared to the morning, and what might happen,
So what have you got for us, Alex? What 9?
Okay, so I'm going to share the screen. And first of all, we've looked at some sort of domains that these theories are in, but you've got to understand that there's overlaps. But basically, we can look at theories in cognitive domain, in social domain, and also in what we might call dispositional, or some people say emotional kind of domains. Yeah. And
Alex, can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah.
Can you just distinguish for me the difference between, for example, social and dispositional in those domains? Just what might be a crucial difference?
I think in general, obviously some of the social theories look at dispositions and some of the cognitive do, but that a lot of dispositional theories tend to look at things that are measured in different ways, that are observable in different ways. And also you might identify that they belong to an individual, where the social theories are really, really interested in social dynamics and what happens when learning takes place across and within students. So dispositional is in some ways more to do with how the individuals work with other individuals, where the social takes the social framework as an important reality.
Okay, that's really helpful. Anybody got any questions for Alex before he moves on? Okay, Alex.
Yeah, and so I'm just going to list these and not put them up until I finish. But basically, in the cognitive domain, where we looked at Piaget, we looked at Daniel Kahneman and his idea of fast and slow thinking systems. We looked at working memory models, in particular Baddeley and Hitch, to do with the idea of working memory being constrained, and also the way that we can plan and intervene and control working memory. And also the one that does the rounds everywhere in the UK, and everyone says, people like Dylan Wiliam, the most important thing any teaches is cognitive load theory. So they're the four in the cognitive domain.
Yeah.
It's social. Do people want to comment on that choice? So just to say again, we've got working memory models, we've got cognitive load theory, we've got Daniel Kahneman's idea of thinking fast and thinking deliberatively slow, and then the Piagetian model of cognition. Okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, and social looked at Bandura and his idea of self-efficacy and kind of peer interactions and the idea of vicarious experience. Looked at Vygotsky and things like zones of proximal development, growing into the intellectual environment surrounding you. What else did we have in the social? Oh, Rogoff's theory, Barbara Rogoff from California, the idea of people learning in a participative apprenticeship kind of way. And then the two dispositionals were a bit heavy on the cognitive. The two dispositionals were the idea of growth mindset from Carol Dweck. And now I'm going to show them all. And Woolley and the work she did on group intelligence, also coming from the US. Okay, so I'll leave them up now, just so you can see the field that we're operating on before we get into the specifics.
Okay.
And one background to this, these were largely chosen from a group of teachers that people like Stuart worked with, who were asked about their views on where the real magic ingredients were in kind of cognitive acceleration programs. And we changed a little bit because of cognitive load theory wasn't something they mentioned, but now it's kind of everywhere, yeah?
That's helpful. So this is a pretty powerful list. You know, if I was watching the celebrities come down the steps with these theories, I'd be pretty happy. Wouldn't be able to at the moment work out which you're going to be left with, but you're going to be left with three. So can you just start to get rid of a few then? Do you want to maybe start with the dispositional?
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to start with the dispositional, and I'm going to disappoint all those that think dispositional things, like Dylan Wiliam says, the cognitive acceleration works, but he doesn't believe in cognitive acceleration. He thinks that it's students change their beliefs and dispositions to think hard when the going gets hard. And there's a lot of people who think that dispositional is really, really important. I also think it's really important, but I think as models that are helpful for teachers, what I've seen in my experience as a teacher is lots of posters with wonderful inspirational quotes. And how are we going to actually use that? You know, and they talk about these things and they're nice and they're fuzzy and feeling. But that's kind of what people would say is the lethal mutations, when people, you know, go on a quick PD and they're told you've got to have growth mindset growing all over your classroom. Yeah, I think dispositional things, often the lack of clear definition is where they fall down. And the authors of this say the same. You know, Carol Dweck is disappointed at the way she's been reduced to nice, cozy slogans. But getting back to the theories and the science of it, there's recently been a really big randomized controlled trial on growth mindset that says it's scalable, but has very, very small effects. And there's a big question mark in the causality, because if you believe in a good growth mindset for yourself, it seems you put more effort in, and that leads to more success. And I'm wondering whether it's the growth mindset or the effort. And I ask, are there different ways of creating effort? And I'll come back to that in the ones I'm arguing for. So also Woolley, a lot of her work was done with adults. And I found it very interesting, the idea of that a group had more intelligence than the intelligence of the individuals. And that depended upon their sensitivity to other views And I can go with them. And I think when we get onto Vygotsky, we'll be arguing how some of the ideas of Woolley can be incorporated. So I'm sorry, but those two I'm throwing over the plank.
But hang on a minute.
Okay.
There's a huge amount of interest in growth mindset, and I've seen teachers react to that in a very powerful way, that they feel they have something to share of meaning with children, which is to do with, as you say, effort makes a difference. And that's because we're not fixed in the way that we are at the moment, that we can learn. And I've experienced both teachers and children who have felt that their world was already stable and fixed. And with this idea introduced in their lives, a certain plasticity begins to appear and more flexibility. And what do other people think about? I mean, we're going to reject growth mindset here. How do people feel about doing that? What do you think, Sarah?
It's really interesting kind of thoughts that have been put forward, because it has been what's been delivered to us for the last, certainly since I've kind of been in teaching, that's been, it's been Carol Dweck and growth mindset. I can appreciate that in some cases it has become a bit of a poster on the wall and a token effort, but I do feel it's got a contribution to make around culture and the culture that's within a classroom, and establishing a safe culture whereby mistakes are okay. So I don't know if I'm interested to hear how the effort comes into that, and because I do think effort has got a large part, and there's children who want to put an effort, but there will also be children who do come with, you know, we've all got our own dispositions in ourselves, haven't we, of cup half full characters, you know, cup half empty characters, and that's not to say that one's right or wrong. I think I did see a shift in teaching, particularly around maths, with when the Carol Dweck growth mindset things were introduced around I can't do it.
Yeah.
I do think it has to be carefully built into a culture in a classroom, and you can't just rely on the poster on the wall, because if it's just, you know, a teacher then going, oh, I can't do it yet, or I'm no good at maths, I'll get someone else who can help me and they'll make me better at maths, I think. So I'm really interested to hear about the ideas surrounding effort, because I do think that is a very much a contributing factor. But I think for me, in terms of teaching and in the classroom, the growth mindset could have been a phase, because you did watch it domino effect throughout schools. And suddenly schools who were coming up good, it was they were doing all things growth mindset. And talking amongst my peers in terms of my teaching friends, it was, oh, you haven't done growth mindset yet, how have you not heard of growth mindset, that kind of thing. So it was like a ripple effect, but actually it's there, and it's but interesting of Carol Dweck's thoughts, thinking like it's been reduced down to being a poster and actually possibly got a little bit lost from what she'd.
Can I come back to you on that, Sarah? Because I think the idea of effort is kind of a precondition. You need strategic application of effort, and Carol Dweck talks about that, but that's often something that gets lost or gets reduced to the dialogue in the UK is, okay, put your effort into retrieval practice. And so it gets reduced to put your effort into memorization, which, you know, has some utility. But I think the idea needs some more bones to it of what kind of efforts, where, how strategically, and the metacognitive kind of what worked for you and how did it work. And so the growth mindset is growing in its self-understanding. So don't reject the idea totally. I think there's some good elements in it. I think some of the other models give a better kind of practical implications.
Okay, well, in the end, ultimately, it's Alex's choice for the moment. So, Alex, you're getting rid of both of those then, yeah?
Yeah,
So, what else have you
both
got?
of those. They're on the plank, and they're in the sea, and the sharks are gone. Okay,
Okay.
moving on to the social. I'm going to try and get rid of Rogoff first of all.
Oh, I like Rogoff.
Barbara Rogoff did some very interesting analysis of what we would call transmission kind of pedagogical cultures, and the idea of discovery type cultures, and was dissatisfied with both. And she came up with the idea that, and we'll see that this is in Vygotsky and in elsewhere, the idea of participative learning. And this is very much, in a way, I would say it very much maps onto Vygotsky's idea of where a teacher is helping the zone of proximal development. And I like her idea about participative, but I think it's subsumed already in things like Vygotsky and Bandura. So I reject her, that she's not really bringing anything particularly new, but except there's a certain political element that I really like, is the idea that students should be participative in their learning. That's a very kind of moral message that she's got, and that leads to better learning. And it's to do with the worth of the child or the learner. And for me, that's a really good, but not sufficient to have teachers practice. For me, it's assuming that children, we want them to flourish. It's support of that, but I don't think it has enough details to be a guide for how we put that into practice. What forms of participation do we do? So I'm sending Rogoff down
into the sea. I want to, I know I can't get Rogoff back. She's already been half eaten by a shark. But what I like about her theory is that it provides an explanation to the teacher that the way that she is thinking is not necessarily evident to the child. And it forms it changes the classroom into a dialogue about the thinking that's going on. And that's making explicit to everybody the thinking that's going on, whether by the children themselves or by the teacher, is part of that apprenticeship strategy. But yes, I can see that could be subsumed elsewhere. So, okay, Rogoff's gone. Are you getting rid of Vygotsky next?
No, I'm just going to kind of keep book that we've got rid of 2 here and 3 there. So we've only got 6 remaining.
Okay.
Okay, and so we've got, we got rid of cognitive load theory. So we've got 5 remaining. So now the next 2 that we get rid of will take us down to our final candidates. Okay?
Okay.
So I'm now going to go here, and I'm going to argue that Bandura, I think, is brilliant, but again, he's a social psychologist. He's famous for the idea of the internalization of experience. He's probably most famous for the violence study of when children see adults or older peers hitting the Bobo doll, and then when they're left on their own, they replicate this violence. But he did loads of other things that are really, really important, I think. But I think he lacks the completeness that Vygotsky brings in terms of, again, how his social psychology will be applied exactly to learning and development. I find him very, very useful. And in particular, the thing I find is social persuasion. But I think, again, the idea of social persuasion is very much in the way we use Vygotsky and the way we lead us as teachers for the zone of proximal development. So I'm showing my biases, but I think that these 2, if we get rid of them, we have their strengths built into the application using Vygotsky.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. What have you got left on the cognitive then?
Okay. Yeah. No. And I made my assumption already because I want to kill cognitive load theory off and take a little bit more time, because it's the talk of the walk at the moment in the UK, and Ofsted swallowed it hook, line, and sinker. And it's one of the poorest theories I've ever seen, personally, for three major reasons. First of all, it's not really a theory of learning, it's a theory of instruction, which I think is okay, is fine if you want to get practical teachers going. But first of all, the idea of cognitive load, the only measurements that really have been used in the research are a 9-point questionnaire after a task where students and learners rate themselves as a self-report. So it has this subjective concept of load. And I find then that that's not really useful for us as a teacher. It's a subjective student report. I think could be used well for metacognitive purposes. But so the theory doesn't have any instruments of measurement. That's number one. Then a lot of the effects they looked at are highly problematic. That there's some things like talking that students seem to do without lots of cognitive load. And a lot of the work they did showed great anomalies, that cognitive load and high load situations didn't seem to flood working memory or overload students. And so to get these anomalies out of the way, they said, well, things like talking are just biologically primary. You don't need to teach them. And now I can imagine English teachers are saying, oh, I just don't need to teach kids to talk. That's what we spend a lot of time doing, good talk about good literature. And so those two theoretical things. And for me, the biggest thing is they've said that the human architecture of learning has two parts, working memory and long-term memory. And so they've reduced learning to memory. And for me, that is the biggest reduction of education that could ever happen. And it obviously clearly fits in with a memory-laden style of assessment that isn't going to help kids flourish. So cognitive load theory, I make myself very unpopular opposing because it's got a big following.
Okay, yes. You're the Craig Revel Horwood of educational theories here, because it is very popular. People do love it. And I think the reason why they love it is it makes a lot of sense and it leads to very direct actions. I'm not going to overload my students or pupils with too much stuff. I'm going to make sure that the message and the noise are separate from one another. I'm going to be cognizant of the amount of time they might need to process it. And it also helps the teacher think about, where am I with these students? Are they novices and therefore they're not yet chunking information, or are they experts and able to handle significant chunks in an integrated way? I
come back to you there, because again, that's another binary dichotomy I think that they've used that goes against a lot of what we experience if we're maths teachers. We see primary students can become quite expert in limited fields of mathematics, in particular when they've got high motivation to do so. Similarly, in things like in English, in poetry, I think they can deal with highly complex things that there seems to be some narrative structures in the brain, and there's lots of research that show that we can work with quite complex things and hold them in memory over time. That contradicts, and most of the research has been done with undergraduates with very small sample sizes. And most of it doesn't add anything new to our understandings of working memory anyway.
Okay, so I've lost count. How many have you got left now?
Okay, well, let's go back to the score chart. We've got Piaget, working memory, Kahneman, and Vygotsky. That's it.
Okay. So are you going to get rid of one more?
Yep, and I'm going to get rid of, and I've already got rid of him, of Kahneman, in the sense of he's very famous for the idea, which I think seems to be totally valid, and we use it in Let's Think all the time, when we give a stimulus and we get quick thinking responses that often are very intuitive, very emotional, very appealing. But when we do some deliberative thinking and the thinking system, the slow thinking system, so I find that his theory seems to describe a lot to do with let's think, but I think Vygotsky also covers some of that ground, the idea of the intellectual framework kids are operating in, and the role of the teacher as mediator. Means we're kind of saying, okay, we've used system one, you all came out with these intuitive, interesting responses, we value them, but now we're going to be deliberative. So I find him a nice, simple model, but I think the zone of proximal development already talks about that. The idea of what is kind of very instinctual, experientially based, but need more discourse dialogue and more cultural kind of tools to kind of sharpen these simple ideas up. So I'm saying Kahneman is gone, leaving us with Piaget, working memory, and Vygotsky.
All right. So these are your top three. These are in the final.
Yeah.
Do you want to justify those in the positive then? Now, what is it?
Well, okay. Can I do that then? In very simple slogans that I want to expand on, because I know simple slogans are a good start, maybe.
Okay. So just before you do that, Alex,
yeah,
let's just invite people at this stage to participate in the conversation. So, which is that at this point, we can now start to interrogate Alex, try and find out a little bit more about what he means by stuff, why he says the things that he said. So, Alex, if you're going for Vygotsky, what's your headline statement about?
Well, okay, our thing is about learners flourishing. And it's the famous quote of Vygotsky that learners, or children, I think he says, depends on the Russian translation, children grow into the intellectual environment that surrounds them. And I think that makes sense to a lot of teachers. And the idea of many students are not surrounded by a very healthy intellectual environment for all sorts of reasons, but we as teachers are able to create that intellectual environment and guide it.
Okay. So you are saying then, if the teacher adopts this theory, they're adopting a theory of creating in the classroom the culture of thought and learning that is necessary for the child to grow into.
Yeah.
They have to think of their science classroom as a place where science is done rather than where science is taught.
Yeah, but can I also go back to what Sarah said before about growth mindset? She talked about the creation of culture. And I'd be interested to hear, but my take on this would be the idea that we value all opinions equally, but give them the same intellectual rigor of criticism. And that we organize so that we have a vibrant comparison and evaluation of ideas, but we accept that ideas are different than the person who says the ideas. For me, that's an intellectual culture, has moral elements as well, of divorcing ideas from people. And I know that's a big take at the moment, because many ideas are highly personalized.
That sounds a little bit like Lauren Resnick and accountable talk and accountable classrooms.
Yeah.
That sense that there is a separation between the individual and their ideas, and that you can be accountable for your ideas, you can be accountable to others, but also you've got to be accountable to the subject knowledge itself, that in science there's a discipline of the seeking of evidence, the propositions of theories, the testing of those theories, and that actually that's the cultural framework for that classroom. So yeah, there's a correspondence there. Okay. Any thoughts, Sarah?
Yeah, I kind of think in the point that you've made around, it's really interesting. So I'm doing my MPQH at the moment, and the entirety of the research is all around cognitive load and working memory and long-term memory. So that was very interesting, because I've just read kind of like a whole plethora of research around that. So to then throw in that is very interesting. And I actually, reflecting on what you've said, I'm thinking that almost the Vygotsky theory and that ZPD almost contradicts the working memory, because Vygotsky is saying challenge children, push them to their zone of proximal development. The cognitive load theory is almost like relieve children of things that can make it more difficult. And in what we've had to do in terms of lockdown and things like that, we've had to, the advice we've been given is to strip everything back, basically, to do very simple task design and do things that the children are familiar with. My experience in the classroom, and when I was kind of teaching daily, was around, so if I did a model in English, I would always do a really high quality to expose the children to the highest kind of level of, because you'd want them to then rise up to it. And I kind of felt that if you never expose them to that, then they're not going to know what it is. I guess SEN and Senkos would go, well, what are you doing for those children? But we know from Let's Think, don't we, that you expose children to that high quality stimulus, they do listen, and actually it can be those SEND children that give the absolute, those moments that kind of spin the lesson on its head and turn it around. So yeah, I mean, I would be with you in terms of the Vygotsky. I do think the ZPD is very important. I do think it's really important that children are challenged and children will respond well to challenge. I was interested in around, you just very briefly touched on it, around the motivation and whether children are motivated by higher levels of challenge, because there'll be some children, like from the lockdown, that actually it was a bit boring because it was kind of more activity based. They had to have it accessible. You needed to make it accessible for all, and there wasn't the teacher there to ask those questions. So I do think that will have lost motivation. I do think motivation is a really key thing. Does motivation come from challenge and pushing children, and is that the same for all children? Because I think there would be differences.
That's a very profound question that all teachers come to in the end, isn't it? What's the level of challenge that children are likely to flourish in? And is that level of challenge appropriate generally across the classroom, or are you aiming to differentiate different levels of challenge? And I think the resolution for me is probably the definition of zone of proximal development. It's not what a child is able to do, it's what the child's able to do with the assistance of a knowledgeable other.
Yeah.
And I think that's why lockdown teaching has probably been so problematic for people, is that often the significant other isn't just a child, although it should be other children, it's also the teacher. That actually, for me, the teacher is part of that community of learning, and they play the role of a learner as well as a teacher, making explicit their own thinking, identifying things that are at odds with what they themselves are thinking. Yeah, but it's a fundamental question, isn't it? And maybe that's one of the issues with the cognitive load theory, is that it removes the pressure on the teacher to provide challenge and adequate challenge. It, as you described it, sometimes let's simplify things becomes let's dumb things down.
Yeah. And I come in there in terms of to make a clear distinction between what I'm talking about, the theories related to working memory and cognitive load, because cognitive load assumes a lot of that previous research, but the working memory models that developed around Baddeley and Hitch and things that have moved on since have the idea of executive control, of learning to plan how you use your resources. And a lot of work recently is about how you outsource those to artifacts, to diagrams, to sketches, to mnemonics, to things that are in the public realm that would be what Vygotsky would call culturally kind of appropriated tools, and that these are accessible to a group. And it means that working memory and executive control are individual and public, and they're something that we can be influence of getting students to analyze their own working memory and the best steps to do things. Where the cognitive load theory kind of has the idea that the teacher is in charge of the tap, where the flow of material goes through this very small filter. And it assumes, I think, it assumes too much simplicity in the learners.
I agree.
So that leaves us with Piaget. Talk us into Piaget. Why Piaget for you?
Yeah, well, I've not called it Piaget, I've called it Piagetian, in the sense that I would say, for instance, in terms of the psychology realm, there's people like Robbie Case and Juan Pascal Leone and Andres Dimitriou, who are neo-Piagetians, who they didn't accept totally his stage theory, and they've developed it, and they've also added in things to do with working memory and executive control at the theoretical level. But then there's practical practitioners, which is the Let's Think community, Philip Adey, Michael Scher, Carolyn Yates in the early days. They adapted Piaget and turned it into tools that we can use to assess students' readiness, tools that we can use to assess the difficulty of the science curriculum in particular. They did similar things in Let's Think Maths. And so the Piagetian framework has been adapted to give lots of tools that are useful for teachers to understand how ready students are, so they can help manage the zone of proximal development, and also how difficult some of the things that before we assumed were not so abstract, but it gave us good insights into how abstract some parts of our curriculum that we'd taken for granted. For instance, some of the formal models in simple kind of key stage 3 science, like doing chromatography and things like this, we realize are more abstract. And they used to be reduced to sort of algorithmic hands-on type activities. So that's where Piaget was the basis for all these people to work. I think a good theory can be expanded by good people and made highly practical. So teachers can know their students and know their material, because everyone's into subject knowledge. But I think the Piagetian framework makes you really look at your subject knowledge. It certainly made me as a science teacher realize the contours of the curriculum that I was either designing or using, and where the challenge points would be.
I see in the notes that you've made on the cognitive that you've just summarized development through assimilation, accommodation, and equilibration. So going beyond the stage development aspects of the model, do you want to just say a little bit about those components?
Well, okay, and this goes to practical things teachers can do. And I think this is something Michael Walsh has written about in English. Loads of people in the science education areas have done, is the power of prediction as a way of showing a phenomena and getting students to make predictions about it. Immediately gets them that they assimilate what the experience is, but then they're forced into the cognitive conflict and to accommodate when their predictions don't come true or are, in some ways deficient. And then the equilibration is, in a way, the way we organize our lessons to try to resolve that accommodation. And so for me, that Piagetian part has been enhanced by a lot of work recently about prediction errors in psychology and neuroscience that builds beyond what we developed with cognitive conflict and social construction. And there's many, many ways. And making predictions is a very powerful motivational and emotional tool. When you get kids to predict something, you know, they're putting their heart and brain on the line. And so I see that in Piaget and the way people have used the Piagetian framework of the assimilation, accommodation, equilibration aren't just brain processes, they're personal processes. Changing our own theories is hard intellectual work, but can be immensely enjoyable.
Yeah. Mary's just popped up a message to us all, which I think is really useful, which is, I've not seen this website before, it's called teacherhead.com, but in the particular piece that she's pointing us to, there's somebody's drawn out their own model of learning. And that's an activity I used to do in CPD with teachers for some time, probably because it was part of my own experience, which was, if you ask somebody to draw how they think learning happens, starting with a head, you know, the head of a child, it makes the implicit theories they have about learning be revealed and helps them notice some of the dissonance between both their theory of learning and other people's theories of learning. I first did it when actually I met Carolyn, who's now my wife, back in 1991, and she said, quite bluntly, I think it's the point at which I decided that we were going to get married if she would have me. She said, "You keep going on about learning, Stuart. How do you think learning happens?" And and then it took me about a month, and finally I had drawn out my own thinking about learning, and in it realized there were some, you know, gaping holes and some misunderstandings, and it really did establish for me a way of looking at the world that I hadn't had before. So I think, you know, please draw how learning happens is a brilliant CPD activity for people.
Stuart, can you hand over for the last part, because we've got 7 minutes, to Sarah and Mary, because, you know,
yeah,
their feedback would be, I think, incredibly powerful for us.
Yeah. So we were going to ask a fundamental deep question, which I'm just going to say what that was, but then I think Alex is right. We should find out a little bit about how the seminar's gone. The deeper question was, how might we integrate Piaget, Vygotsky, and working memory? What are their ways of looking at the world? How can they be integrated? And what would that integration look like in a classroom? That was our deep question, and we wanted to engage you in that. But responding to what Alex said about, let's go into a slightly evaluative moment if we can. This is our first ever seminar. I'm not sure whether we'd ever run a seminar like this again. We thank you for coming, but what do you think? Is there something to this as teachers and professionals that is of value?
It's very thought-provoking. I've just done a lot of thinking, and also it's that critical thinking, because it's very easy to get swayed by different perhaps phases or things that come in, and we kind of know from education that there can be. Lots of teachers, I think, would say everything just goes round in a circle with education, and it, you know, something comes in and is in for a bit, and then it goes out, and then it goes to something else. So I think it's been very useful to strip it right back to what's at the root of it and what's at the root of what we do. And actually, I think that's very useful to take the time to think that. I've thought an awful lot about what the information that you've given, and it's really made me ask critical questions to my own beliefs and what it's very easy to just get swept along with the crowd, isn't it? Of, we're doing this, so let's just go along with this. Whereas actually it is important that you do stop and you think and that you question it, and that's what we would want of children. So yeah, I really liked the way. So I like the questions and working through each of the, so like almost knocking off, but going through each of the educational theories, and in doing that, it made you link the theory. So for me as a teacher, it's made me link the theory to kind of what's in practice and what's going on in school, and I think that would be very useful for teachers. I also think the kind of timing of this and the content based on everything that's happened over the last almost 2.5 years is relevant, because I think some things have got a bit lost. There's been lots that has happened that's good, and education's come a long way because it's had to adapt and it's shown what we have been able to do. But also there's elements, just from my own reflections, and this is kind of talking from my own context, where some things have got a bit lost in terms of the route and actually drawing staff back. And actually this would be a good activity to do with staff, to get them to think. I think that yeah, I like the questioning and being able to then have an input without feeling there was enough background given that you could then have an opinion and you could have make the link to your current context. Yeah, does that help?
It is helpful. That's one of our intentions, so that's pretty rewarding. That. Mary, any thoughts?
Hi, it was lovely. I really like the simplicity of the presentation. Oh, I can put my video on, I think. Not that you want to see me.
Yeah, there you are.
I really like the simplicity of the diagrams and how you went through the different approaches to learning and learning theories. I mean, I guess I would challenge some of the ones that you leave out and you throw out, mostly because I teach learning to the postgraduate students. And so I put, Sarah, I don't know if that's interesting for you, I put in the chat the learning theory poster, because I think it is a bit horses for courses when you're thinking about learning. And I think, Alex, sometimes we've got to, and you were really careful to do this, move away from the purely instrumental. This is my curriculum. This is what I am going to teach you. This is what I have taught you. This is what you will have learned. And I know this because Progress 8, that's all that kind of nonsense that we get caught up in. And the deeper questions about learning, I think it's well worth looking just at one or two of these. And I know working memory is a big thing. I know the learning scientists are a big thing, and retrieval practice and dual coding. And for science teachers and maths teachers, dual coding is a massive thing, really. So I think it's lovely to be able to dip into these and make you and help you think about your own practice. Really, it's really a nice opportunity. Apologize for being a bit late. I was, putting out fires as one does.
Yeah, I'm really glad we did it, Alex.
Yeah.
I think we'll obviously work on the marketing to get more people.
Yeah, can I just clarify one thing, which is for Sarah and Mary, because we've recorded this, because several people have said they can't make it. Are you happy to be in the recording that will be circulated, not worldwide, but like Leo, people within the Let's Think community would like to see it after the fact? Yeah, are you happy?
Yeah, that's fine with me.
Do I have to get you to sign on the dotted line,
I'm fine with it.
And Mary, you're fine with it?
Yeah, I'm absolutely fine. Thank you very much for asking. I really appreciate that. I might put in some of the Edu Twitter links that I've given to the students as well today about learning.
Really helpful.
I don't know if that's helpful to you, but
yes, definitely would.
Okay.
Yes.
I mean, it's my bread and butter job, so I have to. Well, I wish I could do it again. To everyone, time with the chair. These are just some of the. I don't know if those are going to come up. They're probably not live links, are they? Now, because they've come into there. Whereas, of course, I do that. They will be live links on the PowerPoint. Well, I wonder if I can just. Anyway, you can have a look at those. So, you've got the name and the date, and you'll be able to find those kind of things.
I think it's implied in what Mary is saying is that the thesis should teachers have theories of practice that are based on a deeper model about the way that learning happens, because through that they can develop a whole series of actions based on that theory. I think for me, the answer is a very, very solid yes. You need to have a theory upon which one's practice is based. And yet it's very difficult sometimes to see that. One sees accomplished practitioners who don't have the underlying theory there to support them when, as Alex said, there's a bump in the road.
But it's often not related to practice, and I do think that's a problem. So like our postgraduate students will see theory as, oh, I've got to do this learning theory. And I've covered, in this assignment, I've covered a range of different learning theories, learning styles, multiple intelligences, and so on. And then they talk about their practice. It's entirely descriptive and instrumental. I think, you know, these need to be a Venn diagram where they need to intersect a little bit more closely than they are presently.
Yeah, so that profound, our last profound question was a good one, I think, which is, how could we, what would we do if we put Piaget, Vygotsky and working memory together and it was happening in the classroom? What would you see? What were the actions that the teacher would follow? But hey, that's 5:02.
Okay.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks for being the person in the hot seat throughout all of that. It was really good to hear what you had to say. Thanks very much, Sarah, for coming. Thanks, Mary, too.
Yeah,
thank you for having me.
And
bye, guys.
I've learned a lot in preparing it and having a dialogue with you, and which is a kind of a model for kind of within our Let's Think community for professional development, isn't it?
Yeah,
we're planning things together and knocking kind of things into shape as a model for when we work with teachers as well. That we're part of a learning community, we're in ZPD land. So thanks for coming, everyone. I enjoyed it immensely.
Lovely. Thank
bye,
you very
everybody.
much indeed.
Thank you.
See you tomorrow, Sarah.
Bye-bye. Yeah, we'll do. Bye.
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 So Stuart, I'm gonna have to stop the recording now. Okay, that's easier to do if I stop the share first and then pause.
Oh wow, well done.